Let's have a conversation about the Oprah podcast, specifically the recent episode where parents talked about no contact and how they're not acknowledged or receive the same type of sympathy or empathy that their children do when they go no contact. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed therapist. I've been counseling women and men who have experienced abuse as well as those who are perpetrators of abuse and other violent crimes. I have been counseling people for many years now on abuse, including narcissistic abuse dynamics. And, you know, if you've followed my account, you obviously know that, as well as my podcast is dedicated to educating people on healing from abuse. So I want to state that those are what my qualifications are about speaking about it right up front. This commenter here says, if you have not done so already, I would love to hear your perspective on the segment of Oprah that Oprah recently did about estranged adult children and their families. So I have several think pieces about this. I'll try not to put them all at once. But the first one that I have is my personal experience in education and training. I have experience on working with parents who have to estrange themselves from their children. And I have worked with many people who've come to see me across all cultures who I have done this with. I've worked with people who've been incarcerated and so on and so forth. Lots of different settings and situations. And I may have a discussion with parents about estranging themselves from their children. This one woman on the podcast brought up that her son was a threat, in terms of possible violence and things like that. I have personally counseled people, both in prison and out, who have been a threat to their parents. And so I do feel more than qualified to speak on this. First of all, here are my takes on that. The woman, and I don't know anybody that was on there personally or professionally on that podcast episode. My take on this is this. Usually when parents have to estrange themselves from their children, parents that I have worked with do not want to do that. They will continue trying with their children. They know that their children may be toxic. They know that their children may be faced with a personality disorder. In a lot of cases, they know that their children may be dangerous. I also did a post on boys who beat their mothers. And I've worked with many people who've done that, but they're not ready to part ways. That is their baby. They have given birth. The one thing that I noticed on that podcast last night, that personality trait that, where parents are, just heartbroken over estranging themselves from their children because their children may have shortcomings such as violence, substance abuse. Their children are just going down the wrong path, or their children may be reacting to them in a negative way. Most parents don't want to do that. That was not what I observed on that podcast last night. If anything, I observed a certain sort of smugness and entitlement, like I'm the one, that sort of mentality where it's like I'm the one who deserves the sympathy. I don't know what this is all about. And that's number one. Number two, most parents that I have personally worked with who have to do this do not want to talk about it openly like that. There is a lot of shame that is associated with being a parent who's had to do that because, and this is something that I've worked with parents on. They feel like I'm ashamed or I'm embarrassed to call myself a father or a mother anymore because I've had to do that. And so when other people bring up their children, I automatically feel ashamed and embarrassed. And I'm trying to figure out how to navigate the situation to talk about the state of where my relationship is with my child. And I work with them to help them come up with scripts around that, on like how you share that information, when to share, and how much of it is a needs to know basis, that kind of stuff. And so people aren't usually so readily able to talk about that, especially not with the world, because of the judgment, and because, it's hard for them to admit that, like they also do feel sort of a failure, as they feel like a failure as a parent. So those are feelings that many parents who've had to do that wrestle with for years. That is not an overnight process. It is not an overnight process to overcome that. Third, and most importantly, I don't believe parents who've estranged themselves from their children and haven't done any work on it. And that's what I work with my clients on. Like, hey, you've been coming to see me for years, right? So you've had work, you've done the therapeutic work, we've done the interventions, we've gone up, down, all around, sideways to try to remedy this situation. And when it can't be remedied anymore, or when there is genuine safety concerns, we've had to do what we've had to do. But even then, most parents that I work with that go no contact with their children, I always tell them, hey, and they like this. You could leave the door open and you could leave the light on, which means that, if your child corrects themselves, they could come back, right? And again, this is not in my more extreme situations. More extreme situations would be where their children have murdered somebody, or it's like a genuine bona fide. But for people that have had some rifts and other things like that, a lot of them are more open to the idea of like, this isn't forever. I'm going to be realistic about where you're at right now, and I'll leave the door open and leave the light on, in the hopes that, you can get it together, and then we could get back right if you're willing to do the work. I've been going to therapy for years, so you have to also go to therapy for years, and then we could talk about getting back on the right track. And that's the thing, is that parents who are doing the work to get back on the right tracks, that sort of things. They're not going out, they're not spewing negativity about their children. They're not airing out their children's dirty laundry and things like that. They're also owning up to their shortcomings, but they have done the therapeutic work. This wasn't a willy-nilly impulse decision that they made after an argument. It wasn't like that. It's usually many years of stuff that's in the making. Now, with the more extreme cases that I've worked with, where children have maybe committed an extreme act of violence, and it just took one situation, even still a lot of parents are still like, very seldom do I ever have a parent that's like immediate cutoff. Even still, they're still sort of wrestling with some feelings and some guilt and some things like that. So it's never usually one and done like that. And that has been my experience. And I've worked with some extremely violent people who have committed some heinous acts. Children who've been in prison, been in state hospital. I've worked with a lot of them, so I've seen a lot of parent dynamics with respect to that. So even worst case scenarios, I feel confident enough to speak on about that. And that's just been my experience. I don't know all of you out there, and I don't know all of you out there in the world. But what I will say is, parents who are heartbroken about the state of the relationship, and it's had to come after some extreme things that have happened. They usually they are doing the work, or they're usually very resistant to the breakup and things of that nature. And so there are circumstances where parents do have to distance themselves, but it is very difficult in most cases for parents to sever the ties, even when their child has made some big mistakes or some big threats to safety. That's not everybody, but most cases, that's what I have personally seen and worked with. And I hope that helps and makes sense. And I'm going to do some other pieces on the podcast. Thanks so much.